Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this discussion happening to celebrate Black History Month. Before we get started, the Mosaique Interculturelle team, the Canado-Haitian Doctors Foundation, the Senate office, and myself would like to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. My name is Sarah Dorsainville. I am one of the board members of the Canado-Haitian Doctors Foundation, and I will be your moderator today. Today, we're going to have this great conversation that needs to happen about racism and the effects on mental health on young adults. To join me in this conversation, we will start by introducing our first panelist. Her name is Mrs. Bochra Manaï, and I will introduce you to her just a little bit before we get started. So with a doctorate in urban studies, a master's degree in migration and interethnic relations, and a master's degrees in urban geography, the Commissioner for Combating Racism and Systemic Discrimination has over a dozen years of experience in projects related to immigration, diversity, racial and social exclusion, including 6 years managing those projects. Until her appointment today, she headed the Montreal North organization that promotes citizen mobilization for social and territorial transformation called Parole d'Exclus, and coordinated the Table de Concertation Jeunesse de Montréal Nord. Ms. Manaï also contributed to the work of the Table de Diversité, Inclusion, Lutte contre la Discrimination, which forwarded recommendations to the city in the fall of 2019. Welcome, Ms. Manaï.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be with you today, and I thank all the partners who made it happen today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Our next panelist. Actually, I will start with introducing you. Our panelists are of young, strong, beautiful women that will be helping us in this conversation. The first one, I would like her to introduce herself. Her name is Kema.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you, Sarah. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm Kema Joseph. I'm based in Toronto. I currently work in the Mayor of Toronto's office, Mayor John Tory. I am his advisor in terms of outreach and stakeholder relations. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Our next panelist, her name is Maudeline.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maudeline Louis. I was born and raised in Montreal from Haitian parents. I have a bachelor's degree in physiology from the University of McGill. I then went along working in clinical research in dermatology and then in ophthalmology. And now I'm back in school in a micro program in bioethics at Université de Montréal. Well, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
We're glad to have you on board. Our next panelist, her name is Rhonda.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rhonda. Similar to Madeline, born and raised in Montreal, but to Ghanaian parents. After completing my master's degree in global health, I went back to Ghana and I was doing breast cancer and mental health research there before coming back to Canada and deciding to settle in Toronto. where I worked again in cancer-related research, but more in the Caribbean and a little bit still in Ghana as well. Currently, I work as a project coordinator for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health with the team that handles workplace violence prevention. I'm really happy to have this, to be joining you all for this discussion.
Well, thanks for being with us. Welcome. Our next panelist, her name is Lydia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Lydia. I am based here in Ottawa. I am the co-founder of Fabiola's Addiction, Mental Health, and Awareness Support Foundation in honor of my late mother. And I am currently a student at the University of Ottawa in political science.
Lovely. We're really glad to have you on board. Our next panelist, who has a very busy schedule, who will join us anytime now. I will introduce him, however, our male of the panel, and he will jump in as soon as he can join into the conversation. His name is Greg Fergus. Greg is a member of Parliament for All Helmer since October 2015. Greg also served as Parliamentary Secretary to the President of Treasury Board, as well as Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Digital Government. He was previously Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science, Economic Development, and a member of the Standing Committee on Finance. Greg is very involved in his community. He encourages people to invest themselves in causes that are important to them and to work together to fight isolation and to create a sense of community. In the House of Commons, but also as a citizen, Greg is very committed to the Black community, to which he has always shown an unwavering commitment. In particular, he is the chair of the Black Caucus in the Parliament of Canada, an institution that is very important to him. Greg has 2 bachelor's degrees, one in social science, one in international relations. He also has studied international relations at a master's level. Over the past 25 years, he has worked in the private and public sectors with not-for-profit organization and in the academic sector. So as soon as Mr. Fergus can join us, he will jump in the conversation. So let's get this conversation started with our panelists. Let's get right into the subject. My first question to you all would be concerning, I will say, your upbringing. How has your parents had the conversation with you? And I'm not talking about the birds and the bees, obviously, but the conversation about racism. Have they showed you how to behave? Have they discussed with you the impacts this could have with you? I'm very curious to know how they have had this exchange with you, or maybe they have not. Very curious. So let's start with Kema. I'd like to hear how it's been for you.
Thank you. I think that's a solid first question. I think in our household, the way that I guess racism, or at least race, was addressed was first and foremost like a deep understanding of the worth of Black people, Black culture. Our Blackness was very much celebrated, especially through my dad. He was very Afrocentric, so our house was filled with, African art. It was also, there's Greg Fergus, great. Did you want me to continue, or should I?
Please continue, and then we'll speak with Greg just after.
So, thank you. So our house was filled with African art. He was very keen and eager to tell us that, African history is history, and also developing a very critical mind. I think he was a bit quick with that. And what I mean is that, when I was a young kid, like I'd say 8, 9, 10, he would question, Jesus is not Black, or he's not white, rather. It doesn't make sense for him to be white. And now in hindsight, I'm realizing that he was very much instilling that critical thinking, being critical in terms of the status quo, in terms of what is being presented as truth. And so it was a bit of a roundabout about to discuss racism. And I think my parents also had a bit, I think if you're putting it into this current context, a bit of an old school understanding of what racism is. Like, as a Black woman, you're gonna have to work twice as hard, and the system isn't really built for you in terms of like what excellence is, go to school and things like that. And I think our generation has a different understanding of what racism is. Like, I shouldn't have to work twice as hard. The system should change to conform to me and not vice versa. But all that learning that my parents provided me is definitely the reason why I'm, I guess, as successful as I am right now.
It's very interesting how you're mentioning that your parents have drawn a portrait of what it would be for you out there and how your reality has differed from what you were expecting. I definitely want to delve more into that subject and hear our other panelists. I just want to welcome Greg Fergus. We have just discussed your parkour, your journey. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the panel.
I'm so happy to be here, and I was really fascinated by what Kema Joseph had just said, because there is a real generational divide. Thank goodness that the younger generation has higher expectations and is really setting it straight in terms of changing the system. We're all sort of victims of our own history and our own experiences, because I remember that twice as hardline, and I accepted it for my mom. But I'm glad to see that my kids and then seeing people like Kema would see it differently. The system has to accommodate us, not us to the system. So I think that's really important.
And I believe you're a father yourself to 3, I'll say adult children.
Yeah.
So have you had the talk with them? How have you brought it? How have your parents brought it to you, and how has that differed from how you brought it to your kids?
Yeah, I think differently. I mean, my parents brought it to us. It was you have to work twice as hard. You have to, you're never going to catch a break and all that kind of stuff. And accept, try to, just get in. And of course, they wanted me to be a lawyer, and everyone became a lawyer. Here I am, an MP. So disappointed them dramatically. But for my kids, it was a different expectations, and I don't know why, but I think my wife and I just treated them differently. We expected them to, we didn't burden them with that because we felt that things were changing, that the attitudes were changing. Now, sometimes we see, as we see over and over again, some attitudes don't change, but by and large, I think the younger generation has just said, no, that's it. I mean, look what happened after, those 3 videos came out last spring, and the reaction to that.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just Black people who were out protesting or out demanding. It was everyone saying, it was a lot of non-Black people saying, whoa, we don't want to be part of this. We always knew intellectually that racism can kill, but now we see it in full color. Everybody's at home in the pandemic, so we all saw it on our social media channels.
Yep.
And it just really, I think, shook people out of their complacency to say, okay, that's it. This is not on anymore. And I find that the younger generation has a completely different read on it than my generation or older. Indeed. Which is great.
Yeah. There's hope. There's definitely hope. Lydia, I'd be curious to know, how was it for you?
Growing up, I was never exposed to the conversation of what racism is. I think it only happened for me when I moved to an area where it was predominantly white. I think throughout the 10 years that I've lived in my neighborhood, I can count the number of minority families that have lived here. And I think it became a concern for me when I first started high school, because that's when I moved. And someone asked me, oh, do you prefer being white or do you prefer being Black? And I just looked at them like, wow. I'm like, I've never had to answer that question. And I feel like as a teenager, you're already struggling with your identity. Yeah. And you have to not choose who you want to be, but also choose how you want to identify yourself. And then it's then that I had the conversation with my aunt, like, what does it mean to be a Black woman? What does it mean to be a biracial woman? What does it mean to embrace all of your heritage and bring all of them to light without neglecting who you're, like, where you're from and who you are? And I think we're talking about today and all the situations that happened last spring. It's a conversation that became more common because we had to have the conversation with my younger nieces and nephews. And we had to explain to them that we do have to work twice as hard. That's something that's been installed within my family. I'm half Haitian, so my Haitian grandmother's always like, you have to work hard. You have to be a lawyer, be a doctor, be a nurse for you to be recognized, for your work to mean something. And when I first started doing community engagement and even starting the foundation, it was so hard because sometimes when you go in a room and it's filled with people, they won't necessarily go towards you first. You have to pave your way and you have to initiate those conversations and earn the recognition. But I always say, like, hard work, like your hard work you put in right now is the fruit of your labor. So I don't mind doing it, but it does suck that sometimes we do have to have these conversations at such a young age to understand why the color of our skin is presented as a disadvantage rather than an advantage.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Rhonda, how was it for you?
It's so interesting to hear you even mention, not the conversation about the birds and the bees, but about racism. And in all fairness, my parents, we didn't have a direct conversation about it. Like a lot of you mentioned, there was always this push to be the best, because they were the best apparently when they were in school. So we also have to be the best. And so there was that, and the idea behind that is if we reach a certain level, then what other people have faced, it won't attain us because we would have maybe have the finances to be able to protect ourselves or to meet our means. And then you come into the world and you see that that's actually not the case. You could be the most educated person and be stopped in front of your house because people don't think you live in that particular house, right? And so it was interesting growing up. And so that was their way of being able to protect us, is to make sure that we strive to be the best. But I also just think they probably just didn't know how to have the conversation. And not just a conversation about race, about the birds and the bee, all types of conversations. And maybe they felt like, they wanted to protect us. We're too young. When is a good time to actually have this discussion, or feel as though if they start talking to us about it, maybe it'll make us hyper aware of it, of our difference from other people. And so that's how I see it as I'm older and I talk to my parents, we talk about race all the time, especially after the year we had, but it was definitely different growing up. And I also think about it, they experienced racism in a little bit of a different way. Like I said, my parents are Ghanaian, so they experienced racism through colonialism. But does that look like the same when you are, the only person of color in your whole class, right? So it's different types of racism. I attended a really great talk yesterday where it was a physician from Jamaica who was talking about her experience training in the US and how, for her it was hard to understand why people, a lot of Black people didn't have as much hope as she did. But she said, I saw myself in ministers, I saw myself in doctors, I saw myself as lawyers, as in all types of fields. And it's different from people who first-generation Canadians or first-generation Canadians or immigrants that come here afterwards. And so that was basically my experience.
So interesting to see the different, I'll say, environments in which you both, and I'll compare Lydia to Rhonda, how you both came up. But essentially, I find that we end up having to have the conversation, even if our parents try to protect, I'll say, our innocence by avoiding the subject. But somewhere down the line, as we get older, we need to have it. It needs to be said. It needs to be discussed. We need to exchange about it. Maudeline, I'd like to hear how it was for you.
Well, in my brain, my mom never really spoke to us about any difficult topic that there was. Like, I never had the sex talk, not even the period talk. So her focus was mainly on providing us with the necessities of life, like food, like clothes, or like a roof to live under. So I never had really the talk with her. However, I remember having discussions with teachers or educators when I was in school, because I was faced with racism anyways. So I did have to, let's say, to mature within it, but it wasn't with my parents.
It was through experience that you had to build your own concept of it, correct?
Exactly.
Gotcha. And Miss Manaï, I'd love to hear your experience of it. I had the joy of listening to your talk yesterday, and I know that you have so much to say, and I can't wait to have your take on it.
Thank you, Sarah. I will first apologize because my English is not as good as mon français. So I may be more discreet than yesterday. But what I said yesterday is that as an Arab girl who fled Tunisia to France, I experienced my first racism as a non-consent interaction in school, and I was 10. So I think this experience for me was one of the more fundamental, and that led me today, I don't know, maybe 20 years after that, 28 years after that, to still talk about it, to write about it, and to work every day to tackle these really important issues. So, and what is important for me is how, as young kids, we live this, the racism and discrimination in some institutions. And some of the women today said that it's in school actually that we face our first racist interaction. So for me, it's one of the most important thing to say. And from what I remember of this very fundamental experience, I remember that my teacher took it really seriously. So I was legitimate.
They validated.
Exactly. So my experience was not denied, and my mother did not deny it either. And she was actually more she had a really funny way to tackle it. She said, "Tu te laisses pas faire." Like in French, it's you no one can say really hard things to you. So that's probably why institutional validation was one of the main important things to me. But also my mother, what my mother told me was really important to confront and to be able to confront these kind of experiences. So I wasn't asked to be invisible. I wasn't asked to be silenced.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the thing I keep when I raise my Arab Latino boy. So I try to keep this experience and to give him the chances not to be in the distraction. Rhonda said it, I'm passionate about city. I mean, I'm now working on racism because probably that's something really urgent for us to tackle. But I would love to work on other stuff and have other conversations. So as Toni Morrison said it, it's the very essential function of racism is distraction. So I try to raise my kid not to be only distracted by racism and systemic discrimination.
Interesting. And what really transpires from all your interventions so far is really how you seem to all have had a different approach coming into life with racism, which also is either modulated by your interactions first, which are then brought to your parents, and then your parents are forced to have the talk, or your parents just went ahead of the situation and talked you through it, or simply, let you fend for yourself and hope for the best. So let's kind of dive into those experiences that either forged you. Let's start, let's say, with Maudeline. How you talked about how, it's through school, you had experiences that, were your first kind of in your face experiences. So tell us about those experiences. And today we really wanted to focus on microaggressions. So how have microaggressions transpired in your experience?
Mm-hmm. I usually don't react to microaggressions because I tend to look for intent. And a lot of times those microaggressions are not even, there are good intentions behind it. For example, I've had a situation where 90-year-old lady came to me, and I was talking to her because she had a visit at the clinic, and she was very nice to me. And then at one point she told me, you know what, you're very pretty for a Black woman.
Yeah.
And I know,
yeah,
you know that her intention was good. She wanted to compliment me, but it's still the type of microaggression. So for those, I tend to let them slide. I don't react to it. It doesn't really affect me that much. However, there are some other situations where the microaggression was not even targeted to me, but that affected me on a deeper level. For example, I had a situation where I was walking with a colleague, and we saw this man who was waiting in the clinic, but he went a little further and he decided to pray. And she made a comment about the fact that he was always praying there, and it was kind of bothering her. She thought that it was not a suitable place to pray. And for me, that showed lack of openness, and that's what bothered me. This man was actually trying to, how do you say? He was trying to be polite. He went away from everyone else in the clinic to pray and be quiet and be okay by himself. But that still bothered her. That to me, it affected me, because if she can think like that for this particular person, this person from a marginalized group, then why wouldn't she talk about things about me, you know? So
absolutely. Very also interesting to see and understand that racism, whether it's done to us or done to someone else, still has an impact. We still feel like we are also being persecuted or discriminated against, because we also see a difference in ourselves and we say, this could be me. Very interesting. Rhonda, tell me a bit how your experience with microaggressions has been.
It's interesting because, kind of similar to Madeline, my experiences, I tend to not react a lot of times because I'm like, did this really happen? And I think it goes with what was said a little bit earlier about needing that sort of validation. A lot of times I'm like, is it me that's being, and I hate to say it because I might be feeding into it, but is it me that's being dramatic or too sensitive? Or did that really bother me? And are my feelings valid, right? And there's certain levels of microaggression, like Madeline said, where it's the intent is I'm really learning the difference between intention and impact, because you can have good intentions and your impact still be very devastating. And so that microaggression could be, again, the intention was great in the middle of our conversation. So like one conversation I was having with a colleague where we were talking about Florida, because there's always something wrong with going on in Florida, right? And so she mentioned a particular place in Florida, and she was like, oh, you definitely don't want to go there. And I know her intention was to say like that it's a really racist place and everything, but it still made me feel, especially since we were having the discussion with other people, it made me feel very singled out. And so these are the type of a kind of aggressions that are not always like a direct attack, that could still have you feeling like, okay, am I being too sensitive to this? And I remember in the moment just kind of laughing it off, but then going home and being like, huh, that was a little awkward. Why do I feel this way? And so that's kind of been my experience with it. Just always trying to juggle, are my feelings valid? And am I okay to just experience these feelings, and that's okay. I don't need validation, right?
Thank you, Rhonda. Kema, how has it been for you?
It's been almost like a learning process. The term microaggression didn't exist when I was in high school. And so there was, like Rhonda was saying, there were these moments where something was said and internally you're like, huh, okay. And then like time would pass, you go back home and you're like, I'm still thinking about this thing. And I guess the language didn't exist. And then when the term microaggression was coined, I was like, oh, like these small comments that, to Madeline's point, although the intent is to be most of the time playful or not to harm, are still impacting me in a way that's extremely negative and hurtful. And I think what's important to take note is that these microaggressions pile up. And so, you know, if I've been here, like I almost said I've been Black, but I've been Black my entire life, meaning that I've been Black for 30 years. And these microaggressions pile up, and you get to a certain point in your life where you're like, I don't think I can. I find basically what I'm trying to say, it's very detrimental to your well-being and your understanding of self and how people represent you. And I think it also impacts the way you move in certain environments, in certain spaces, meaning that I'm assuming, not wanting to speak for the other panelists, but the reason why we just laugh things off is that we don't feel safe in the space to say that was hurtful. And I have tested that with people I thought, who I deemed close to me, and the reaction is always very negative and reactive and defensive. That's not what I meant. And I think non-Black people, non-POC people have a hard time understanding that racism is a very like state of the matter fact. You hurt my feelings. This is how you hurt my feelings. Just don't do it again. And for some reason, I find non-Black people, non-POC people have a very hard time taking that, absorbing it, processing it, and not doing it again. So
they're very scared of getting that sticker of being a racist.
And it's not that deep. You're not a racist. What you just said is racist. The way you behaved is racist. You are not a racist person. And to your point, I think they conflate it right away and have a hard time distancing themselves in the same way that I can still be a homophobe, by like not nice, but like what I'm saying can still be homophobic, it can still be very problematic, but we should take these microaggressions as moments to learn and moments to grow, and oftentimes people don't take that.
Well said. Lydia, talk to me.
I freshly graduated high school less than 3 years ago. So when I think of microaggressions and racism, like I first experienced it in high school. And I think a moment that will forever like stay in my mind is when we tried to plan Black History Month. And we weren't a lot of people of color, and they told us it wasn't important. So they discourage us to celebrate our identity. And it's a situation where you're like, oh, like I can either be mad and act dramatic and act out of anger. But then I always think of this Martin Luther King quote that says, hey, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. So I took it as a chance to educate. Kema mentioned it. You learn every day. You have to educate them about what they're doing wrong. And I think even though they are older than me, it is important to know that every day we're learning something new in life. And you can't just allow them to act upon it, because there is the intention and the impact. But if I can be the bigger person and be like, hey, like, by the way, your comment, it hurt me and it wasn't appropriate and it felt discouraging, then I am acting as if, I like to say like agent de changement, I'm saying it in French, sorry. But I'm not allowing it to continue, because there could be like, oh, I did something wrong. I can reflect upon it and make sure that I don't redo the same act in the future. So yeah.
Lovely. Yes, being an agent of change, indeed. Mr. Fergus, for being in the Black Caucus, you have the opportunity to confer with a lot of individuals and get everybody's experience and base with the basis of those experiences make change happen. Tell us a bit about how microaggression has come about in your conversations and what have been kind of the outcomes of those conversations.
Well, first of all, my dad's still alive, so call me Greg. Okay. And he's still Mr. Fergus. I'm learning so much from this panel, and I really appreciate the differentiation between impact, intentionality, and impact. Mm-hmm. And what really I think, you know, personally, and what I've heard from others is that impact, of course, has an effect on mental health. You know, it gets us. I mean, we were all laughing, uncomfortably when we would point out different things. I mean, I bet you all had the question, "Where are you from?"
Yep.
Right. So I've been in the Outaouais region of Quebec since 1988, and I remember I get the question, "Where are you from?" And I'd say Montreal, and then they'd know, "Where are you really from?" And I'd say, "Okay, they know Montreal, Dollar des Homos." You know, and where are your, and oh, okay, you want to know my background, and that's a question that we only get, you know, and that sort of plays on you. I remember the first time when I before I had this job, I had a job where I traveled quite a bit, and I had this really long. We were going other side of the planet, so I was able to take first class. That was nice, except when I had the agent come and ask me twice, not just once, but twice. This line is for first class.
Wow.
This line is for first class. Ooh, okay, first time I'm willing to forgive. The second time, I wish I had the presence of mind that Lydia had, or others who have spoken here today, to have said, that's not right. You're hurting me. Don't assume that I shouldn't be here. Or if you go on a bus, if you ever take the bus off, and you'll notice that the last seat to get filled quite often is the seat beside a Black person. As women, as Black women, you have a different intersectionality and a different reality than I would have as a Black man. But as a Black man, I think I'm seen more as a threat, and it's a physical threat, dangerous. That gets at you. Just one last thing. I just remember when we had the unveiling of the $10 bill with Viola Desmond being on it, the first woman to being on a Canadian banknote, and she was a Black woman.
Yeah.
And I started to cry. I was sobbing, and I was wondering, why am I sobbing? And I realized it was just one of those times where you get that release of all, like, this was a moment saying, wow, I'm being valued for being Black. There's a Black woman that's on our dollar, in our banknote. But I was thinking of all the times that people across the street, because I'm walking along the street, and they're threatened by me, or the times on the bus, or all those microaggressions, that you've lived through. We try not to pay attention to them because they'll crush you. But boy, sometimes you have to have a release.
Yes, I agree. Miss Manaï, I'd love to hear your take also on microaggression. I believe it is probably the segment of discussion that's not as spoken about. We highly speak about what's in your face, racism, but sometimes microaggression are a little more subtle. And I know you have an interesting take on that.
I wanted to share something with you. I work at the city of Montreal since, I don't know, 4 weeks, 5 weeks now. And thank you. And like these microaggressions, like we learn how to sometimes to deny it. Honestly, sometimes I'm like, I don't care. I don't have the time. I don't want to educate like this person. Sometimes I feel that, okay, this is really important. We have to be strategic. So let's ask a question. Like, you leave the person with something. And since I'm working at the city, of course, a lot of people are like super scared by the things I have to talk about. So I laugh a lot, and I'm like super convivial, as we say. So I work with a colleague of mine, and after the first meeting we had, she said something in Arabic to me. So I was like, did I really hear that? So I'm working with this person for like, I don't know, 3 weeks now, and I was trying to understand why. And Rhonda, you said it. It's really important to make a distinction between the intention of the person, but also the impact on us. So I'm documenting everything in my work, and when we will finish our work together, because it's like a collaboration, like a small project. Collaboration. I will have some, like probably the researcher in me will ask her to tell me why she needed, why she thought it was interesting to talk in Arabic to me. Like, maybe even if she thinks I'm Arabic, maybe I don't talk Arabic. Like this, you have like all the token folklorization, and so it's really interesting to understand why some people have this intention. And what I wanted to tell her is that if she does this in a contribution with the Commissioner on Systemic Racism, what is she doing with others?
Right.
So for me, it's but I also have the job to do it. So for me, it's always take these microaggressions, to analyze them, and to use them as examples to make people understand that make fun of some things has no impact on no one. So why do you do it like on your work time? So it's really important to see us as actors, like, social actors. So for me as a commissioner, I have to educate people. So if I confront microaggressions, I have to analyze them and to educate. So, but of course, when I'm going in the street, I don't want to leave some other interaction. So sometimes you don't have the time, and it's totally okay, I think, to not like to don't want for you not to educate people. So for me, it's like multiple strategies we have to use. And I don't know who mentioned the laughing, but after the first meeting, I was laughing like during 1 hour, and I'm laughing after all the meetings. So I'm like, no, I cannot laugh. As Greg said, I have to mention the fact that it's not correct.
I like the strategy word that you use, and which kind of brings me to my other question. So with all this experience that we're getting with these microaggressions and this self-reflection that we're doing, either we're coming back home having this discussion with ourselves, like, why am I still thinking about this event happening, or simply being in the moment and feeling compelled to say something. I would be interested to know, and some of you already touched about it, how today you feel that you've built either your wall or your strategy to address those microaggressions. How is this your scheme? Is this your way of going about it? Are you conscious that you're doing it? I'd like to hear from Kema.
I think I have a few ways to tackle or to deal with microaggressions. I think I've made peace with the notion that I don't have to teach anyone anything. I can send you a nice little article. There's people like Ms. Manaï who is, trained and paid to teach non-Black people, non-POC people how to act, period. Mm-hmm. And so if I decide not to say anything because I'm tired, I'm fine with it. I also work at the city of Toronto. I'm thankful to have like a Black staff network, a group of Black people who are not just my friends, but who move and work within the same institution, who I can go and vent, be like, this white person said, homie, Karen's acting up again. Can you believe? So I'm able, like, I have like this way to release a lot of stress and to, commiserate with fellow Black people. And also self-care is like mad. It's like extremely real. Like if it's, for example, it's a Friday and it's 3:30 and I'm just tired because of something happened early today or the weight of the week, like, let me just log off early. Like, not everything is pressing. I don't need to answer emails. I have a therapist. I think it's important as Black people, especially as Black women, to talk to therapy, even if it's not a therapist, to follow Instagram accounts by Black women therapists. These are kind of my coping mechanism. Cry. I think we don't cry. Like, this whole idea of the strong Black woman, cry. It's fine to cry. It's not small. Again, this is like years of like, you're not crying because of that one incident. You're crying because you're constantly moving in a world, in a system that is built to oppress you. It is okay to cry. I
like that. Being, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Lydia, I'd love to hear your take on it, especially that you're co-founder of Fabiola's, and I don't want to misspeak, but Fabiola's Addiction and Mental Awareness Foundation. Is that correct? So tell us a bit how your coping mechanisms have been.
I mean, in the beginning, my coping mechanisms have always been to work extra hard and to educate those around me. And at the age of 17, I think I burned out. like I burned out. I couldn't, like I had no motivation. I was doing long weeks. And at the time I was involved a lot in the community on the political level, especially in the Francophone community. And I think with the foundation coming in and having to have those discussions about mental health, it enlightened me. And, you know, we have the idea of the strong Black woman, and that's all that surrounds me. Like, I've never seen my grandmother cry. I've never seen my aunt cry. And to me, it's very rare. So to have those conversations with the community and to talk about vulnerability and what it means, I think I grew a circle. Therapy is very important. The foundation promotes it a lot, and we try to offer it to our members of the community at like no charge, because we understand how important it is and how essential. I think as a young person, I always say, always have that one friend you can call to vent.
Yes.
Sometimes we don't want to communicate or like continue in the dialogue, but we just want someone to hear us and to understand, and to not try to put the shoe on both feet and just continue to hop on, you know? So I think just having a strong circle around you is enough to cope with these microaggressions that we face every day. And also acknowledge that it's okay if we don't want to talk about it some days. We don't have to. It's not our homework to talk about it every day. You can take a day off and say, like, you know what, today I'm going to unwind, I'm going to deconnect, and I'm not going to think about it. I'm allowed to just take like a mental rest day.
I like that, mental rest. You did mention also how, what I'm taking away is a bit how, culturally speaking, I'll say one of the stereotypes is the strong mentally, and sometimes strength, it also means, well, it seems to mean that we can show vulnerability and cry and kind of let those emotions come through without being said that we're angry Black women. So that's one of the things I think that we need to kind of work through at destigmatizing that those notions, really. Rhonda, tell me a bit, how are your coping mechanisms?
I think Kema and Lydia have laid out a lot of the ones that I do. So therapy has been amazing. And I encourage everybody, whether you feel as though you just having somebody to discuss things with and to kind of strategize on how to handle certain situations is great. And then logging out of social media if I need to, just taking the break if I need to, especially during the time, I think it was 2015 or 16 or 17, when, you know, there was back to back with Philando Castile and a whole bunch of, we were just, it's so hyper vigilant, like, so we're so hyper aware, it's always in our face, Black death. And so especially in social media, so I've had to some days say, hey, I'm going to log out for a week. And that's what I've been doing. And the place that I've really experienced a lot of my microaggression experiences has been in the workplace. And I have this I feel as though I have this added pressure of, I have to represent my people, because It's not just me. Because if I act in a way, then they'll be like, oh, well, all Black people, you know, Black people this or Black people. So I feel this added pressure that, you know what, I'm going to address you, but I don't want you to think that, I don't want to feed into the notions that you have of how Black people are, or Black people this. I am me, and what you did really affected me, and I'm going to tell you how I feel about it. Whether you decide that, you know, this is a representation of all Black people or not, that's on you. But I'm going to tell you about yourself when you need to be told about yourself. And so always having that extra pressure, but always trying to think through, like, how do I come clear off in expressing how I'm feeling? And so those are my therapy, telling people about themselves, and taking the time off. The 3 T's, I would say, are the ways I've been dealing with it.
I like it, the 3 T's. Maudeline.
For me, it's kind of sad, but I usually just laugh it off and brush it off. And like I said, I think that is deeply sad that I always have to brush it off without having to address it. And I usually do that because, like Kema mentioned it before, a lot of time, if you talk about it, people get defensive, and then it just gets uncomfortable. So a good way to go about it, I think it would be to educate people, to be more responsive, to be more open to the fact that they did make a comment. but it doesn't mean that they're racist. They just have to improve. So yeah, brushing it off and laughing it off. That's pretty much my mechanism, or talking to friends, basically. I do have to mention, I don't know if it's because of the microaggressions per se, but just like Rhonda mentioned, I tend to think of whenever I have to go in a workplace, especially in a professional workplace where it's white dominant, you have to always be perfect, because you don't want anybody to be able to make any of those comments, about the fact that all the stereotypes of a Black woman, So yeah, always trying to be perfect.
Representing for the race, always that kind of that burden, instead of just representing the person and the individual that you are, independent of race. You carry kind of that with you, hoping to.
Exactly.
I hear you.
Just to interject a little bit, I'm wondering also, Madeline, if when you laugh it off, I'm wondering if it's also because you're saying, you know what, I'm not going to fight. I'm going to pick my battles wisely. And do I want to give this energy to it? No, I'm just going to laugh it off and move on. So I wonder if maybe that's another part of it.
That is true, but when you always brush it off, that can become a problem, because you just never address it. So yeah, but it is a good point,
But I don't think there's a good or bad coping mechanism. I think it's what works for you. If that's what allows you to kind of get through to your day and keep focus on your own goals, I think that's what's key at this point, really. How about for you, Greg?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I don't know if I deal with it in a healthy way. I feel a pressure because being a politician, being a member of parliament, I'm afforded an opportunity to act and to make policy changes. So I've sort of told myself over the last number of years is that I don't have time to. I don't think I'm taking care of myself as well as some of the other panelists are doing, because I just feel that I could have a short time in the position that I have, and so I just feel that it's a race against the clock to try to bring in measures which can help improve the lot of Black people and all people of color and Indigenous people, with what I have. So I've just been I found, like, last year, when those videos came out, they were brutal, and I felt like that low, but everybody turned to me as a politician. What do you, as a Black politician, what do you say to that? So I had to artificially keep an even keel, even though I certainly didn't feel it. And it took about 2 weeks, 3 weeks for me to finally to really feel that I found an equilibrium again. But for those 3 weeks, it was depressing. It was brutal. I wasn't sleeping nights. I was questioning me. I mean, that's what those things do. They so dehumanize. They devalue us when you're confronted with it. When somebody calls you the N-word, or you hear this big debate about it, or you hear about the denial of systemic racism, you just sort of think, like, how do you deal with this? How do you, what do they are denying what we experience all the time. And so it's just, how do you keep an even keel? I don't know if I'm doing a healthy thing or not. I just feel that I feel like I have just a certain amount of time, and I just got to make the most of it as I can while I'm in this position.
But I do hear that you are taking the time to understand how it is that you feel about it, because once you do, then it makes it possibly more empowering and easier for you to then respond and to push forward those goals and those voices of others that you're trying to help. So I think that's actually a really good thing to really, without you realizing, but it seems that you're actually finding to take the time, even though they're not positive emotions, but understanding that they are happening and that they're happening to you. So I think that's a good thing. So thank you for that share. And I hear you. I heard you talk about videos coming out, and I heard Rhonda mention also social media. And I think media is really also feeding into all this discussion, whether it's conventional media or social media. And I find that really interesting because in our own home, behind our own screens, we hear all this information that's being given to us, and then we have to process it also with our own experience and our own experience with microaggression. So I go to Miss Manaï. I know that you are tied to the media. Unfortunately, they are always there telling about what you are doing every day and the efforts that you're doing or not doing, depending on how they want to spin it. So how do you feel that they feed into the narrative? Do you feel that it's an hindrance, or do you feel that they're an ally in the conversation?
Ooh, it's gonna be a way to answer the media issues, but sometimes I feel we have to find ways to always compensate like this death energy. It's like the issue of racism. One of the most like problematic thing about racism and systematic racism is that is how it's being shown and represented in the media as always something new. Oh, something happened in, I don't know, in the US or in France or in Canada or in Montreal, and it's always denying all like the historical for first the historical point of view, but also like the fact that trauma is also something that is really deep in embedded in our history. So of course my personal history is not related directly to the Black communities of Montreal, of Quebec, and of Canada, but from my African perspective, who lived in France and who lived in a France where Black and Arab people confront the same racialization and the same conditions. So I know I am in a different place, but I always feel that the media is trying to, c'est comme l'actualité. It's always something that is treated as like the news, or I don't know if it's clear. I'm sorry. I would like to be more clear than that, but that's the thing that I don't know. As an intellectual, as a woman who studied, who read, I'm every time I have to tackle something in the media, I go back to my books. So I go back to my Black feminist, to my Arab feminist, to the indigenous women. And I say feminist, I'm not trying to say that men are not part of the conversation. I'm just saying that I feel that I get back my energy in reading those women who confronted, who cried. Kema, you said it's so right. Like, we need to cry. Like, it's violence. It's about violence. It's a history of symbolic and real violence, and it's a matter of dignity and like Black bodies from the time you're out, you're threatened. You're not the threat. You are threatened. So for me, it's really important to put the light on real stuff. But of course, do we have the time in media to do it? So for me, it's really important to choose my battles when it comes to media, and to say in the past 5 weeks, I mean, in the first week, talking about me, I was not invited to the conversation. I was invited to comment on some of the perceptions people had about me, but I chose to talk to those people I consider my people, and in those spaces, I try to give our experience of what is being racialized when you're an Indigenous woman, even if I'm not Indigenous? What is being racialized when you're an Asian Montrealer? So for me, it's right to choose the spaces where our narrative has to be the more complex and the most rich. So I read and I invite people to read.
I like that. Yeah, it's not just a headline to sell more clicks or get more likes.
Yeah.
It's definitely a way bigger story than just the news of the day.
We are not headlines. No.
That's right. Let's go to Rhonda. How do you feel about media? Ally, enemy? How does it feed into your daily?
So like Miss Manaï said, so the point that she was making is so valid. The point about how they present it in a way that it's so new, denying the history. And because of that notion that it's so new, it makes it seem like it's an exception. This is not the norm. This doesn't happen on a regular basis. And that's why a public figure can go in front of everybody and say, there's no such thing as systemic racism in this place, because this is the first time we've ever seen it. It doesn't happen, right? So that's the two sides of it, where it's like, because of especially social media, I would say, and the media, both types, traditional, it can put it in people's face a lot more. And the more it's becoming consistent, the more they can't deny it, which is great. But on the other side, as somebody embodied in a Black body, it can have such a detriment to see, like I said, Black death, like on a almost daily basis, to our mental health, such a detriment to our mental health. So it plays on both sides, where it can allow us to advocate and push for the change that we want to see, but it can take a toll on our mental health. And so that's where I'm on both ends of it. I have to say, I'm glad with my social media, whenever any huge issue happens, I go on Twitter and I go, oh, I'm following the right people, because I just, the things that people are pushing for, things that people are saying, I'm like, okay, I'm aligned with it. So I'm seeing the change, and I'm seeing people advocating. So one thing about social media that's great is some people who didn't have the voice, who could be silenced by traditional media, have a platform to push the right narrative. I'll say the right narrative. So that's my relationship with media right now.
And the good part also, like you were saying about social media, is that you can choose the narrative you want to follow, and you can kind of push out what you don't want to see. Definitely interesting. Lydia, how is media? Ally?
I'd say it depends, because you choose a narrative, right? And I think especially last spring, I saw a lot of people who wanted to actually advocate for the cause and express how they're feeling. But I also saw some people who wanted to use it as a trend. Oh, I'm going to post a Black square on Tuesday because my friends are doing it. And one thing that I like to do sometimes is stir the pot. I'm like, okay, then why are you posting the Black square? What does it mean to you? How does it change something in society? How are you using your power on social media to actually make an impact amongst those in your circles? Are you actually taking the time to educate yourself on why that Black square can A, be beneficial, or A, have a negative impact? And I think it depends how you wanna choose your narrative. It depends what your intentions are. And here comes the conversation of intentions and impact. Because I think as a person on social media, one of our strongest tools, I say as a person, is to communicate. But are you communicating the right thing? That's where you have to position yourself. So an ally in most cases, yes, but also it can be detrimental to your mental health and to the cause, because sometimes everything gets taken out of proportion because it's not used in the right way.
Agreed. Maudeline.
I actually don't even have anything to add. You, Rhonda and Lydia just laid it out perfectly. It can be, well, actually, I think social media is pretty much a tool. It's a tool to push a certain narrative. And like we mentioned it, the Black Lives Matter was pretty much in our faces last year. It did show, like Rhonda mentioned, it did show that this was an issue, and that's nice because everybody can definitely be aware that it exists. But like Lydia mentioned, to me, there was a lot of trending. Like there was a lot of people who was just using that as a trend, and that's where it becomes very sad. We see that it gained in popularity, and then are we really seeing it as much today? That's where it's
Right.
it wasn't continuous.
There was a fire. It was a passing trend, and then it kind of died down a bit like a passion. Kema, how do you feel about? And I'm going to switch it a bit in terms of the question, but we just talked about the Black Lives Matter movement, how it was such a hype during the summer. And now we're kind of seeing it a bit trickling down. Maybe less people are in the forefront, maybe because it's cold out. I don't know. They don't want to be protesting as much. But tell me how, as that movement had influenced your environment or influenced you, do you feel that it empowered you? How has been your take on how this movement has come about?
Truthfully, initially, I thought it was a bit random because it was, let's understand, it was a resurgence of a movement that had already erupted, especially in Toronto. I think it was in 2015 with the Black Lives Matter Toronto stopping the Pride Parade. And so I thought it was a bit random that people were paying attention to this one specific death when we've seen so many Black bodies or so many Black people be killed by the police. And then I realized that it was because, I forget who mentioned, but because we're in the pandemic, we were almost forced, or at least non-Black people and non-POC people were finally forced to pay attention and to realize that, oh, like all the Black people were right when they were saying that we were being killed and things like that. In terms of how it impacted my workplace, it allowed me to, I was able to really, what's what I'm, I want to say capitalize on the moment, but really like capitalize on the moment and get a lot of things done for Black people, have a lot of meetings. Our office was able to do an anti-Black racism training. It forced a lot of conversations. It also allowed me to explain to the office, like, this is the reason why Black people are tired and why it seems a lot more acute now because of the pandemic, because we've been bombarded by imagery. And although these images are from the States, they do impact Black Torontonians or Black people in the country in terms of how the BLM moment impacted me, and also questioned my motives within my workspace. As someone who works at the city, as someone who works at in politics, it forced me to question: am I being complicit in white supremacy in the way that I move? Am I forcing Black people to be palatable to the city, to conform again to what I was saying earlier? Or am I forcing people who look like me to conform to a system? Am I, to what Mr. Fergus was saying earlier, throughout the entire moment, I really was numb. Like I really forced myself to not see anything, to not feel anything, because I really had to focus on advising the mayor on how to navigate the moment. And come September, I really burnt out, and if not like mentally, physically, because I was suppressing and everything. And so it really forced me to realize what I was doing to myself, to my own body, to my well-being. That's what the moment, that's how I lived the moment in the summer.
I see. And Greg, has the movement helped, I'll say, create a buzz around what you were already so invested in doing and the efforts for the community? How has it helped your efforts?
Well, so I think listening to what people are talking about, Lydia sort of had a interesting way of put. I think, Lydia, if I were to describe what you had said, and it's how I feel about the media, especially social media, I think they're frenemies to all of us. So on one hand, they're helpful for us to get out the message. On the other hand, they're singularly unhelpful in perpetuating the myths and the stereotypes and anti-Black racism. And I'm glad that Kema brought it up, white supremacy. I think we have to remember that when we look back on what happened last year, it wasn't just one video. I think what because it's an answer. It's a game we can't ever have an answer to, or it's a question we can never have an answer to. But what would have happened if it was only the George Floyd video that had come out? I don't think it would have had the same impact. We have to remember where we were. There were 3 videos that came out in 3 days. There was the Ahmaud Arbery assassination that had happened in February, but the video only came out at the end of May. And then within a day and a half later, there was the Christian Cooper, Amy Cooper confrontation. Of, you saw that white supremacy, or the instrumentalization of police as a tool to suppress Black people. That threat that was made, and it was a very credible threat that she made. And then the following day, you had the George Floyd, brutal murder, right? So I think it was those 3 things in a row that just really threw us over the edge. I wonder sometimes if it had just been George Floyd, if it would have been as impactful. I hate to say it. But we only remember his,
Very interesting. I'd like to hear how Miss Manaï. So Black Lives Movement and the efforts that you're trying to do, how has that helped or amplified what it is that your objectives currently?
I think I regret, not regret, but I think I will share what Mr. Fergus or Greg said, because I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, there was a documentary on the Black Lives Matter movement in the US. And I don't know if you watched to that documentary, but I remember not being able myself to breathe because the documentary was so violent, and you have like the density of all the videos, like all these tragedies, and it was a few years ago. So from what I remember last year, I tried to share anti-Black racism, and not to share, but to make people understand that it's a collective responsibility to understand and to see it. Like there is something specific. So I on anti-Black racism, I try to be the best ally, and I try to we say in French, we say les angles morts. Like when people are talking about racism, I always try to to put the light on some of their how do you say blind spots? Thank you. so on the blind spots. So and for me, it's always important, as I said it, like to play the historic card. Like it's not the first video, and Rhonda mentioned Breonna Taylor. Like we have to realize that it's not a matter of one video, as tragic and horrific it was for us to watch it, and I think people needed to watch it. And in Quebec, we also had Joyce Echaquan's video. So for me, it's when I after these videos, I had, I don't know, I think it was a formation, like a training at the in an organization. And what I said is like, we always talk about the fact that revolution will not be televised. And it's, I think what we live right now is the fact that like the violence of racism is being televised, and that's something we cannot deny anymore. So about anti-Black racism, I try to as I said, to be the best ally, and to share to people that it has to be a collective responsibility. And maybe just to finish, when we talk about racial profiling, it's also important to, like, yes, racial profiling touches a lot of different categories. Like in Montreal, we also have the Indigenous women that are really like that are really impacted by racial profiling. But when you think about it, it's also the black while you drive, like black while driving. It's you have to. I mean, people have to understand that some of the discriminations that like racism have a lot of ways to be illustrated, and I'm so sorry for my English again, but anyways, so and we have to understand and to realize that racism is multiform, like and it has specific illustrations depending on people and on categories. So yeah, that's what I can say.
Well, thank you. This brings us a bit to the end of the time we had allocated in order to have our beautiful discussion. I just want to mention to the people watching that Greg had to run back to the House in order to be in Parliament and do what he does best. So we thank him very much for his input and his insight. It was great to have him on board. I just wanted to, first of all, let's take a picture of this great event. Thank you. And so before we go, I just wanted to touch on all the resources that are available to anyone, but really we are addressing the community right now in order to get help and in order to have a safe place for you to talk about how it is that you feel on a daily basis about these microaggressions, about racism, about discrimination. It's safe place for you to exchange. If you can find a friend, if you can't find a family member for you to exchange with, there are some resources that are available. So as you see at the bottom here, you can call the 211 line. It is a service in French and in English, depending on the language you feel more comfortable talking. And they have local resources depending on where you're from. And don't be afraid to reach out. And I believe our panelists also gave great insight on how it is that they cope on a daily basis. And hopefully you have taken those takeaways for yourself and will adopt them in your everyday. So we have just a couple minutes. I might just want to go around and have everybody just kind of say their last words to finalize and conclude this this conversation. Let's start with Kema.
I just want to thank you all for having me. Thank you, Mosaique Interculturelle. It's been such a pleasure and honor to be able to join this amazing panel. I've learned a lot personally, and I just want to wish everyone a good rest of their Black History Month celebrations.
Thank you, Kema. Madeline.
I also want to thank everyone, Mosaique Interculturelle, as well as la Fondation Canado-Haitian des Médecins. I think the panelists have been amazing. You girls are great. Thank you, Bochra, Manaï. This was amazing. And thank you, Sarah, for doing an amazing, how do you say that?
Hosting.
Thank you. There's a word for it, but I can't find it right now.
Thank you so much. Rhonda?
Again, thank you to all the organizers. Thank you, panelists. You have been amazing. This was a really great discussion. I think one last thing I want to just harp on a little bit is I love our resilience, our Black resilience and how it manifests itself in so many different ways. Just in our level of creativity. So even talking about Sarah Cooper, where people taking that video and doing remixes on it and people doing choreography, like that's how that level of Black joy and Black excellence, just focusing on that really is one of the best ways for self-care. And so I hope everyone enjoys the rest of Black History Month, and I hope that our paths cross again sometime.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Well said. Lydia?
I just want to thank the organizers for organizing this event. I am forever grateful to participate. I feel like I have learned so much in this 1 hour of discussion, and I think it's something that I will cherish not only for a very long time, but I can also share because you have said some very wise things today. And as a young woman, like it's so enlightening. So thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. And Bochra, Manaï?
Thank you. Thank you for your animation and your hosting, Sarah, and thanks to Greg, of course, and thank you, ladies, because I think one of the way to tackle this is to confront with Black joy, and to take those spaces to make them, because it's the only way to shape our institutions, our society. So keep going.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all my panelists. I had such a great time today discussing with you all. I also learned so much, and it also feels very soothing to have these conversations. I feel like this needs to happen a lot more. We need to be bringing this out a lot more. Lastly, I would like to thank also my co-organizers, Cachemire Saint-Germain for Mosaique Interculturelle, Nicolas Thibodeau for the Senate office, and again, representing la Fondation des Médecins Canado-Haitiens, myself. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Black History Month. Have a great end of day, a great weekend, and hopefully our paths will cross again. Take care.